Avalon was already halfway through the anti-lightning sigil when he realised that the hedge wizard's spell was continuing. Surprising. Dual element spells were rare enough amongst polished circle elves. For a backwards self-taught like the human in front of him, there were signs of a prodigy. Still, it was hardly worth noting for someone with his centuries of experience. He simply re-looped his hand instead of closing his fist, preparing himself to charge his sigil with a second element in turn. Or so he thought. His almost bored counterspelling was replaced by consternation. The first sigil he'd identified clearly enough. Aerithurgy of the Third Ring, a lightning blast designed to cripple warriors by overdrawing their muscles. Atypical for wizard duels, but perhaps the hedge wizard was trying to avoid lethal options. He would be disappointed if he expected the same courtesy from Avalon himself. But the second spell he'd never seen used in a duel before. It was a biomancy spell, but far more intricate than the lightning spell, at least 6th ring. He'd seen something like it used to reattach severed tendons. Why would he try to heal me right after harming me? The hedge wizard maintained focus as he traced the last symbols through the air, completing the cast. Avalon closed his fist and finished his sigil, protected from the lightning part of the attack. If there was a look of trepidation on the hedge wizard's face as he finished, Avalon assumed it was fear from fighting a superior mage. He assumed wrong. There was a sound like the rigging of a ship tearing loose, like a mighty cord breaking under unimaginable strain. The hedge wizard howled in pain, but more important than that, he flew. Avalon had no time to cast a physical barrier. He'd been prepared for lightning and thunder, not for the filthy, half-feral man to cross the 30-foot gap between them in half a second. His brain was still trying to process how healing plus lightning resulted in a wizard launcher. The wizard slammed into him at waist level, a dagger-sharp shoulder aimed perfectly at his diaphragm. The sound he made as every fragment of air left his body was similar to the noise a rat would make while getting run over by an ox cart. The two bounded down the road, a Gordian knot of limbs and robes. Avalon may have been caught unprepared for the dive tackle, but he wasn't completely useless in a scrap. His reflexes were still top-notch, and even when he couldn't tell up from down he could still cast a ward against blows. The hedge wizard was definitely slower and smaller than Avalon himself, but if nothing else he was in his element. Avalon managed to throw a few sharp elbows into his ribs, but when the scramble stopped, the human was the one on top. The sigil was not focused enough to full stop the first blow, but it softened it. His head still bounced back against the grass, but it was hardly the crushing blow that the hermit had clearly hoped for. The second blow was also warded, but still went hard enough to draw a trickle of blood from one nostril. He tracked the recoiled fist of the human wizard, and was surprised to see a large rock clutched in its palm. He must have snatched it off the path some point during the tumble. Sly little bastard. He did have an ace of his own, a little trick built into every ward he cast. Wrapped in all of his defensive casts, he always threw in an energy trap, a way to turn the enemy's physical strength against them. Between the tumbling and the punches, the physical ward was practically shimmering with built-up charge. He released it with a snarl. The hedge had no time to react. 1 second he was trying to pummel Avalon to death with a rock, the next he was physically thrown 10 feet back. If he'd landed on his back, Avalon would have had enough time to finish him off with an ice spear, but the stupid, grimy, wicked little beast landed on both feet and charged forward like a bull. Centuries of knowledge analysed in fractions of a second. Spells, wards, sigils, none could be cast before the human crossed the gap. Only one choice. He swung a haymaker at the human's jaw. His mind worked faster than his arm could alter course, and he watched in slow motion horror as the human twisted its head and ducked, taking the blow on the forehead instead of the chin. Avalon's punch had more power than sense behind it, and decades of sedentary life had made him soft. He barely had time to wince at the boxer's fracture he gave himself, before he felt the little man's arms wrap around him, surprisingly, from behind. He must have managed to slide under his leg. As he reached down to break the vice grip that the human had, he realised that the human's fingers were twitching the same lightning spell that they had before. He'd been too busy fighting for his life to process what the hell that opening move had been, but in that split second he realised what was about to happen. The human didn't use lightning spells to attack directly. He used them on himself, as a way to overload his muscles and gain a temporary and painful burst of super strength. The healing was just used to fix whatever horrible damage he did to his own muscles at that point. The twitching stopped, and he knew that the convocation was complete. He could only sit in silent horror as he felt every muscle in the human's body bunched together in one powerful pulse. The arms around his waist crushed together like a vice, hard enough to snap at least 2 of his lower ribs. He felt his feet lift off the ground as the muscles in the human's back pulled taut, saw the ground rush up to meet him as he was flung carelessly over the human's shoulder. It wasn't a clean knockout. It was a filthy, vicious, visceral knockout, and in the human's eyes, that was far better. The hedge wizard spent a few seconds on the ground, quietly contemplating his choice to pull every muscle from his hamstrings to his shoulders. He didn't have enough mana to fix himself right as rain, but he could work up enough to at least get himself on his feet again. He took a moment to drag the unconscious elf into the shade under a tree, before rummaging around the finely tooled leather bag. There was a bag of candied nuts that he helped himself to, as well as a small bottle of brandy, but the rest he left be. He liked his creature comforts, but he wasn't a bandit. He just wanted to make a point about what happened to people that tried to barge through his woods, only to threaten violence when told to leave. He couldn't tolerate bullies, but he especially couldn't tolerate bullies blessed with magic. Still, he felt a little bad for his petty theft, and slightly impressed with the physicality of the fight. He'd hemmed and hawed for a few seconds before fishing through the pack again, this time pulling out a quill and some parchment. Using one of the hardbacks in the bag as a desk, he wrote a small note to leave on the unconscious elf's lap. Nice haymaker. You can travel through provided you bury your shits. When you return to your very fancy circle, try to read a book on how not to get suplexed. Haha. Signed, Tom Bug. P.S. You're decent enough for a book wizard. I guess you can stop by again, if you behave. Bet your friends are pricks though. Tell them to stay away, or I will kill them with a rock. Thanks for tuning in. Maybe check this one out next.